Okay, now for another recap of Israel's history. We've had a couple of these so far. This is the third one we've done. We just did one a couple chapters ago, which was pretty much a straight up recap of the history. It was, some, truncated, a very abridged version of their history, but still. And here's another one. This is another one that pictures Israel as a woman. Israel and Judah as two sisters. So, like in Ezekiel 16, when we did this, we pictured Israel or Judah as a baby girl that had been left abandoned, and that God found and took and raised. This is another one of those kinds of ancient imagery that probably don't hit us the same way today that they were supposed to hit the people of Ezekiel's day, because the gender dynamics here we're a lot more sensitive to that today than they would have been back then, or at least in a different way. So we probably aren't going to, our initial reaction is it's probably different than what Ezekiel's audience would have had and what Ezekiel was expecting. So we have to keep that in mind. Another one of these kinds of things. This is the last one in this book, at least. We're not going to have to read another one of these somewhat uncomfortable allegories of history with Israel as an adulterous woman again. This is the last one of these. The word of the Lord came to me. This is Ezekiel 23. Son of man, there were two women, daughters of the same mother. They became prostitutes in Egypt. There's a reference again to them following the gods of Egypt while they were there. Engaging in prostitution from their youth. In that land their breasts were fondled, and their virgin bosoms caressed. The older was named Oholah, and her sister was Oholibah. Oholah, we don't have a footnote here for some reason. But Oholah means something like my tent, and Oholibah means something like my tent is in her. They were mine, and gave birth to sons and daughters. Oholah is Samaria, and Oholibah is Jerusalem. So my tent is Samaria, my tent is in her is Jerusalem, which of course refers to God's dwelling place being there. And then the whole tent idea itself is, I'm sure, a callback to the tabernacle. And when they were living in the wilderness to begin with, and they all dwelt in tents. There has always been kind of an idea of living in a tent. Even today, even in the New Testament, our bodies are referred to as tents. Temporary dwelling places that are going to be replaced with something permanent someday. So the idea of tents, or dwelling in a tent, or living in a tent, and then moving from that to a permanent house, like that concept is part of the biblical imagery from start to finish. Oholah, Samaria, engaged in prostitution while she was still mine, and she lusted after her lovers, the Assyrians, warriors clothed in blue, governors and commanders, all of them handsome young men, and mounted horsemen. She gave herself as a prostitute to all the elite of the Assyrians, and defiled herself with all the idols of everyone she lusted after. She did not give up the prostitution she began in Egypt, when during her youth men slept with her, caressed her virgin bosom, and poured out their lust upon her. Therefore, I handed her over to her lovers, the Assyrians, for whom she lusted. Now this is referring, the Assyrians were around for a long time before they finally conquered Israel in 722 BC. We've been reading about them for some time. There are monuments of Israel's King Jehu from like the 840s BC, bowing down and paying tribute to the Assyrian king at that time. So the idea of Assyria had been, of course, is north of Judah, so they had to deal with the northern nations first. The kingdoms that come from the north had to go through Israel to get to Judah. So Israel had been dallying around with Assyria for a long time before Assyria finally came and took her away. Therefore I handed her over to her lovers, the Assyrians, for whom she lusted. They stripped her naked, took took away her sons and daughters, and killed her with the sword. She became a byword among women, and punishment was inflicted on her. In this case, it'd be amongst the nations, because these women are standing for nations. Her sister, Oholibah, Jerusalemite scent is in her, saw this, yet in her lust and prostitution, she was more depraved than her sister. She too lusted after the Assyrians, governors and commanders, warriors in full dress, mounted horsemen, all handsome young men. I saw that she too defiled herself. Both of them went the same way. We read about that way back in the days of Ahaz, when Isaiah was there, in Isaiah 7 and 8. And Ahaz wanted to make an alliance with Assyria, and Isaiah warned him not to. And he did anyway. Caused them 100 years worth of problems by doing that. But she carried her prostitution still further. She saw men portrayed on a wall. Figures of Chaldeans. Back then they drew all their arts on walls. You've probably seen pictures in books, history books, encyclopedias, or things like that of ancient Mesopotamian art on the walls. She saw men portrayed on a wall. Figures of Chaldeans portrayed in red. So the Chaldeans, we're not talking about Assyrians anymore. Now we're talking about Chaldeans, Babylonians, portrayed in red. So the Assyrians wore blue, and the Babylonians wore red. So even back then, it was red versus blue. We had a lot of red versus blue going on today, too. But even back then, the Assyrians and Babylonians were red versus blue. With belts around their waists. And so we're not, just as that's a bit of a funny little bit, but, we're not as progressive as we like to think we are. Human nature never really changes. History is cyclical. And we do the same things every other generation has ever done. And there's nothing special about us. There's nothing special, unique, or particularly enlightened about us. Figures of Chaldeans portrayed in red, with belts around their waists and flowing turbans on their heads. All of them looked like Babylonian chariot officers, natives of Chaldea. As soon as she saw them, she lusted after them, and sent messengers to them in Chaldea. Then the Babylonians came to her, to the bed of love, and in their lust they defiled her. After she had been defiled by them, she turned away from them in disgust. When she carried on her prostitution openly and exposed her nakedness, I turned away from her in disgust, just as I had turned away from her sister. Yet she became more and more promiscuous, as she recalled the days of her youth, when she was a prostitute in Egypt. There she lusted after her lovers, whose genitals were like those of donkeys, and whose emission was like that of horses. Wow. They were pretty wound up, in other words. This isn't a donkey or a horse, but a number of years ago I went to the zoo. I've been going to the zoo pretty regularly with my nieces, as long as they've been alive. Well, not since they were 3. I started going with them when they were 3. They're 14 now, so that was 11 years ago. When they were in kindergarten, they had projects to do on various animals. I forget what it was exactly they were supposed to do, but anyway. One of my nieces was doing a project on zebras. So one day when we went to the zoo that year, we went to go see the zebras. And the zebras are in this St. Louis Zoo. There's this big area called the Red Rock area, because they have a lot of red rocks there. And the zebras are in that area. It's kind of like the African part. Africa/Australia, there's some kind of overlap there. And the zebras are in that area, so we went to that. It's way at the edge of the zoo. You have a lot of walking to get there. And the zebras themselves are at the edge of the area. Like they're on the very outer border of the zoo's territory even. And so we were there, and the zebras were like in a couple different pens. And the male zebras have enormous nut sacks, and so you could just see them as they're standing there, just this thing hanging out underneath them. And my 5-year-old niece, of course, kindergarten, there's no such thing, but immediately she recognized the boy zebra. And he was kind of off by, I think he was in a different pen. I mean, this was a number of years ago by now. I mean, I think he was even off in his own pen, but it's like very clearly different, something different about this one compared to all the others. This is a zebra, not a donkey or a horse, but. So, you long for the lewdness of your youth, when in Egypt your bosom was caressed, and your young breasts fondled. So they were never supposed to do this, by the way. That was one of the things they were told in the law. Back in Deuteronomy 17, you're not supposed to go back to Egypt. The king must not acquire great Deuteronomy 16, must not acquire great numbers of forces for himself or make the people return to Egypt to get more of them, for the Lord has told you, you were not to go back that way again. They weren't to go back to Egypt. They were not to try to recreate the past. And they did. This refers to, of course, them turning to Egypt for help in dealing with Babylon, after they got tired of being with Babylon. Therefore, Oholibah, Jerusalem, my tent is in her. This is what the sovereign Lord says. I will stir up your lovers against you, those you turned away from in disgust, and I will bring them against you from every side, the Babylonians and all the Chaldeans, the men of Pekod and Shoa and Koa, and all the Assyrians with them. Now, who are Pekod, Shoa, and Koa? Just people groups living in that area. This is not the last time Ezekiel is going to mention some pretty obscure names to make a point. We'll see that again later on. And all the Assyrians with them, handsome young men, all of them governors and commanders, chariot officers and men of high rank, all mounted on horses. They will come against you with weapons, chariots and wagons, and with a throng of people. They will take up positions against you on every side, with large and small shields and with helmets. I will turn you over to them for punishment, and they will punish you according to their standards. I will direct my jealous anger against you, and they will deal with you in fury. They will cut off your noses and your ears. Ow, that doesn't sound very pleasant. And those of you who are left will fall by the sword. They will take away your sons and daughters, and those of you who are left will be consumed by fire. They will also strip you of your clothes and take your fine jewelry. So I'll put a stop to lewdness and prostitution you began in Egypt. You will not look on these things as longing or remember Egypt anymore. For this is what the sovereign Lord says. I am about to hand you over to those you hate, to those you turned away from in disgust. They will deal with you in hatred and take away everything you have worked for. They will leave you naked and bare, and the shame of your prostitution will be exposed. Your lewdness and promiscuity have brought this upon you because you lusted after the nations and defiled yourself with their idols. Now, in chapter 16, the imagery was about them lusting after the idols themselves. Here, they're lusting after the nations and defiling themselves with the idols of the nations. You have gone the way of your sister, so I will put her cup into your hand. This is what the sovereign Lord says. You will drink your sister's cup, a cup large and deep. It will bring scorn and derision, for it holds so much. You'll be filled with drunkenness and sorrow, the cup of ruin and desolation, the cup of your sister Samaria. You will drink it and drain it dry. You will dash it to pieces and tear your breasts. I have spoken, declares the sovereign Lord. Therefore, this is what the sovereign Lord says. Since you have forgotten me and thrust me behind your back, you must bear the consequences of your lewdness and prostitution. The Lord said to me, Son of man, will you judge Oholah and Oholibah? They confront them, with their detestable practices. For they have committed adultery, and blood is on their hands. They committed adultery with their idols. They even sacrificed their children, whom they bore to me, as food for them. They have also done this to me. At the same time, they defiled my sanctuary. At that same time, so when they were offering their children as sacrifices, they defiled my sanctuary and desecrated my Sabbaths. On the very day they sacrificed their children to their idols, they entered my sanctuary and desecrated it. That is what they did in my house. They even sent messengers for me who came from far away. And when they arrived, you bathed yourself for them. You bathed yourself for them, painted your eyes, and put on your jewelry. So made yourself look nice and attractive. We saw Jezebel do this even to Jehu when he approached her. And she was an old woman on the day of her death. So figuratively, this woman is dressing herself up to look lovely. You sat on an elegant couch with a table spread before it on which you had placed the incense and oil that belonged to me. The noise of a carefree crowd was around her. Sabaeans were brought from the desert, along with men from there. There's a footnote down there saying drunkards. I don't know if it's Sabaean or drunkards, I'm not sure. Maybe it's the same thing. At any rate, people were brought from the desert, along with men from the rabble. And they put bracelets on the arms of the woman and her sister, and beautiful crowns on their heads. Then I said about the one worn out by adultery, now, let them use her as a prostitute, for that is all she is. And they slept with her. As men sleep with the prostitute, so they slept with these lewd women, Oholah and Oholibah. But righteous men will sentence them to the punishment of women who commit adultery and shed blood, because they are adulterous, and blood is on their hands. So they deserve this punishment because they have done both of these things. This is what the sovereign Lord says. Bring a mob against them and give them over to terror and plunder. The mob will stone them and cut them down with their swords. They will kill their sons and daughters and burn down their houses. So I'll put an end to lewdness in the land, that all women may take warning and not imitate you. Now it does say women here, of course, because that's the imagery we're following. But these women stand for nations. So in this regard, and the point being made here is that nations around Israel are going to see this and take a lesson from it. Or at least they should. You will suffer the penalty for your lewdness and bear the consequences of your sins of idolatry. Then you will know that I am the sovereign Lord.